I stepped off the plane at Fiumicino, with my knees aching from nearly 9 hours in the air, still gripping the small velvet box holding my mother's necklace. It had been ages since I'd traveled overseas, not since Harold died, but Corin wouldn't let me say no. "It wouldn't feel right without you, Mom," he'd told me. "You're still family." Still. That word hovered in my mind the entire flight. There had never been an official invitation to Riley's birthday in Rome. No formal email, no agenda, just my son's vague assurance that I'd be welcome. Maybe that was enough for him. But for me, it felt like stepping into a room without knowing if anyone actually wanted you there. During the taxi ride to my hotel, I messaged Relisa. "Hi dear. I've just landed. What time is dinner tonight?" I kept it light, warm, motherly. No answer. My hotel overlooked the Tiber. I unpacked slowly and set the necklace, silver with a deep blue lapis stone, on the desk. My mother had worn it to every meaningful occasion. I'd had it restored recently, imagining that Relisa might appreciate its elegance. Still no reply. Scrolling through social media, I saw she'd posted a cappuccino picture 2 hours earlier taken in a cafe just a short walk from where I now sat. "Final planning touches," the caption read. Planning for a dinner no one had bothered to inform me about. By late afternoon, the silence sat heavy. At 5 p.m., I finally texted Corin. "Just checking in. What's the address for dinner?" He answered within a minute. "Oh, right, Palazzo Oriente. 7 p.m. See you there." No apology, no explanation. I put the necklace back in its box, collected my clutch, and headed out. The palazzo glowed under golden lamplight as I stepped inside the courtyard, the cobblestones cool beneath my shoes. I'd chosen a navy silk dress, Harold's favorite, and the earrings Relisa had once praised. I hoped, foolishly, that the night might hold a hint of grace. The maitre d' greeted me with a polite nod. "Good evening, Signora." I gave my name and the party I belonged to. He scanned the guest list, paused, then frowned. "There is a reservation for 12. But your name is not on it." Past him, I saw them already seated: Corin, Relisa, her family, even her college friends I'd once hosted for Thanksgiving. All of them gathered under a pergola woven with vines and floating candles. 11 guests, 11 chairs. Still, I walked toward the table. Corin looked up, surprised, but not alarmed. "Mom, you made it." Relisa didn't rise. She lifted her wineglass and waved dismissively. "Oops," she said with a light laugh. "Guess we miscounted. Silly me." A soft ripple of amusement fluttered around the table. A waiter appeared with a folding chair. I shook my head. No need. I won't stay long. Setting the velvet box near the untouched bread basket, I looked at my son, then at Relisa. "Happy birthday." She smiled as if the moment meant nothing at all, and I turned and walked away, heels clicking softly across the stone. Down a narrow side street beside the restaurant, I stopped near a small fountain, the sound of water blending with distant laughter from the courtyard I'd left behind. My fingers brushed the pendant in my bag, the necklace that had never even made it out of its box. I took out my phone. One contact in my list hadn't changed in 20 years. I tapped the name. When he answered, I spoke only 3 words. "I need access." Back at my hotel, I slid out of the navy dress and unfastened my own necklace, placing it neatly over the chair. The room felt oddly hollow. I didn't turn on the TV, noise felt unnecessary. Instead, I reached for the black binder I always traveled with. Not out of habit, but because it held pieces of the life I had built long before anyone's indifference tried to shrink me. Inside were old event plans, laminated schedules, seating charts for high-profile weddings, floral palettes for Nobel dinners, wine pairings for retirement galas in Provence, names and logistics I'd once managed with absolute authority. I flipped through the pages slowly. Every sheet reminded me who I had been, who I still was. Tucked into the back pocket was a letter from Margaret Arlotti, now Director of Operations at Cello Roma Catering. Years ago, she'd been my nervous young intern in Boston. I had mentored her, recommended her, and congratulated her when she got the Rome promotion. Curious, I looked up the catering company on my phone. They were listed as the official vendor for the next night's main celebration, the big gala on March 19th. I logged into the vendor portal using an old set of credentials I assumed were long expired. But they worked. Under the booking for Arm Lee, I found it. Emergency contact A. Mersley, Senior Contingency Advisor. They had never removed me. They'd relied on my reputation, my vendor relationships, my legacy, and then offered me a folding chair behind a pergola. I opened the vendor list with a single tap. The florist, the string quartet, the wine distributor, all people who knew me by name. I clicked Edit Access. Then I reached for a blank sheet in my binder and began drafting what needed to be done line by line. With the same economy of words I'd always taught my interns. Power doesn't need paragraphs. By midnight, the instructions were typed, printed, and signed. I walked downstairs to the concierge and requested the fax service. The young woman behind the desk hesitated when I handed her the documents, but professionally said nothing. I gave her 3 numbers: the caterer, the florist, the musicians. The message was brief and absolute. Please cancel services for March 19th at Palazzo Oriente. Authorized by emergency contact. A. Mersley. She faxed each one, stapled the confirmations, and sealed them in a neat envelope. I slipped it into my purse. I didn't call Corin. I didn't need to. He had let me fly across an ocean for a chair that didn't exist, a name that wasn't written down, a presence that wasn't wanted. If they wanted a flawless night, then they should not have forgotten the woman who built flawless nights for a living. I lay on the bed, letting silence settle around me like a soft wrap. Somewhere across Rome, Relisa was probably reapplying lipstick and basking in borrowed elegance. Tomorrow, though the unraveling would begin, a florist with nothing to deliver. A quartet suddenly without a venue. A wine distributor issuing refunds. Emails unanswered. Procedures broken. A perfect evening developing cracks no one could smooth over. It would start quietly, a whisper of confusion, a glance among staff with no instructions, and it would end in the kind of silence I no longer planned to fill. The following evening, Palazzo Oriente shimmered under candlelight and crisp white linens, staged perfectly for Relisa's grand celebration, at least on the surface. But from the moment the clock struck 7:45, small fractures began to show. Their first glass of wine never arrived. The sommelier was nowhere to be found. In his place hovered a young server who kept glancing at the hallway with a tight, nervous smile. When Relisa snapped her fingers and demanded, "Where's the Rosso di Montalcino we selected?" he stumbled through a half-excuse and slipped away, never to return. In the corner, the quartet played their opening sonata, then stopped. Packed up silently, a cello case zipped, wires coiled, bows sheathed and left without so much as a nod. Guests began whispering. I could almost picture the exact expression forming on Relisa's face, that brittle, forced smile stretching too tightly, the one she used when something slipped beyond her control. "Where is the event coordinator?" she hissed. But there was none. The person she might have blamed, relied on, or barked orders at was upstairs in a cotton robe, drinking elderflower tea on a balcony with a clear view of the courtyard. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the head chef reread the cancellation notice. He knew Margaret, respected her judgment, and more than once had worked with me. But with no confirmation, no payment release, and rising tension, he made the final decision. The 3-tier hazelnut torte was boxed and wheeled into storage. When Relisa asked for a sneak peek, the pastry chef pretended not to understand. Across the courtyard, Corin pushed his chair back and pulled out his phone. I watched from above as he began to dial, then froze. I saw it hit him. The shift in his posture, the way his shoulders sank. He knew. The timing, the precision, the disappearing staff, none of it was coincidence. His face drained of color as he slowly sat back down. He had finally connected the dots. Around him, forks clinked against empty plates, the murmurs growing louder. Guests glanced at their watches. One of them, Donatella Marsto, notorious for dramatic disapproval, rose in a shimmer of gold sequins. "Is this some kind of artistic statement?" she asked, voice cutting through the courtyard. "Because it feels embarrassingly unprofessional." A flush crept up Releasa's cheeks. Not from wine. She shot a frantic look toward the staff corridor, searching for anyone to rescue the unraveling night. "Just a minor delay," she said, trying to sound composed. "The wine is coming any minute." Donatella sighed loudly. "I've attended 5 of your events, darling. This is the first time the staff looks more terrified than the guests." Then Riley's father, Mr. Chellian, stormed off toward the back rooms. Minutes later, he returned with the floor manager, who smoothed his tie and gave a stiff bow. "We apologize deeply for the disruption," he announced. "There was a formal cancellation received earlier today, signed by the registered emergency contact." Releasa blinked rapidly. "What cancellation?" He opened his binder and pointed to the faxed paper. "Emergency contact, A. Mersley." For a moment, the entire table went still. 11 faces slowly turned toward Corin. He didn't look at anyone, just pressed his fingertips together beneath his chin. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but unwavering. "My mother used to manage major international events. High security, high profile. Half the vendors here learned under her." He exhaled slowly. "Her name is still on the system. I never removed it." The reality settled over the table like dust and sunlight. "She had the authority," he said at last, his eyes lifting to meet Releasa's. "I just didn't think I needed to tell her she wasn't welcome." And just like that, the applause in Releasa's own mind, the fantasy of her perfect, curated evening died. They had never meant to be cruel. Just dismissive. Casual. The kind of casual that only happens when people think you'll always show up quietly, without asking for anything. But that night, they discovered what silence can do when it finally decides to speak. They hadn't always been outright harsh with me, not in obvious ways. Their cruelty had been softer, disguised as politeness, wrapped in tone rather than words. The first time I felt it was during their engagement party. I had offered to host something small and elegant, a garden luncheon with music, the kind of gathering I'd perfected over decades. But Releasa smiled tightly and said, "Thank you, but your taste is more maternal." The way she said maternal made it sound like outdated wallpaper. She hired a luxury planner instead and placed me behind a floral arrangement so enormous I couldn't see half the speeches. Then came the years of distance, artificial, calculated. She only called when she wanted something. A renovation loan help, paying for her sister's design program, a new car to keep the baby safe. Her voice always chirped with sugary warmth until the transfer posted. After that, silence. Not a thank you card, not even a text. Corin wasn't much better. When Harold died, I set aside a portion of my retirement for something meaningful, maybe travel, maybe a conservatory membership, something healing. Corin asked to borrow it for a can't-miss bistro concept. He showed me glossy renderings, called me his first investor, brought me a chef-signed apron. The bistro closed in 9 months. The money was never mentioned again. And still, I forgave. Because that was my pattern giving. Smoothing. Accommodating. But in Rome, watching their carefully curated night collapse under the weight of a single fax, I didn't feel spite. I felt clarity. For years, I had taught others how to make rooms feel welcoming, how to craft spaces where every guest felt included. And yet they had treated me like a folding chair, something to be unfolded when convenient, forgotten when not. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. 2 weeks later, back in Rhode Island, I returned to my quiet house, resuming the rhythm of my days. One afternoon, sorting through the mail wedged between utility bills, I found a small pastel envelope. The handwriting was painfully familiar, soft loops pretending to be affectionate. From Releasa. Inside was a belated birthday card, dripping with floral print and gold script. I opened it, half expecting maybe foolishly some kind of apology. Instead, a $5 Starbucks gift card slid out. Above the generic, "Wishing you joy," she had written, "Thanks again for coming." That was it. Nothing about the missing chair. Nothing about the ruined event. Nothing acknowledging the truth every person at that table now knew. Just $5 of coffee and a sentence as empty as a hollow reed. I laughed. Laughed louder than I had in months. Because by then, the decision was already made. On my kitchen counter sat a thick folder labeled Nor Culinary Foundation. Inside were finalized transfer papers. I had moved every last remaining cent of Harold's estate into a charitable trust for culinary students. The kind of bright, determined people who reminded me of the interns who once called me Miss Mersley with genuine respect. The trust would fund scholarships, internships, small business grants, programs for women reinventing themselves after 50. The board would have 5 members. I would chair it. Corin was not listed, not even as a backup. He assumed, without asking, that my estate would one day fall into his lap as though inheritance were a reward for simply existing. Let him learn through silence. Let the lawyers explain when the time came. Let him piece together how a woman who had been denied a seat at their table took the entire table with her, and the wine list, and the flowers, and every last chair. It started as a whisper, a single Instagram post by a fashion columnist who had attended the Rome trip and documented every outfit, every espresso, every scenic alley. Her caption read, "Possibly the most disastrous birthday dinner in Rome. No staff, no wine, no cake, no host. 0 class." By morning it had 40,000 likes. Comments poured in from food critics, former colleagues, even a few industry veterans who recognized my signature in the chaos. Some called it karma, some called it sabotage. Some called it a masterclass in consequences. Within days, 3 of Relisa's brand partners quietly backed out of sponsorships. Her blog, once a shrine to curated elegance, lost its sheen. She posted a vague statement about unexpected complications and then disappeared offline. I assumed that would be the end of it, but life has a way of circling back. The knock at my door. One rainy afternoon, I heard a soft, hesitant knock. When I opened the door, there stood Corin, hair plastered to his forehead. Thin jacket soaked through, no umbrella. He looked older. Not because of age, because of shame. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He dripped onto the hardwood floor like a schoolboy arriving late to class. He sat at the same table where I once drilled him on flashcards, where he'd signed his first loan documents with shaking hands. Now he stared at the steam rising from the mug I placed in front of him, as though he wasn't sure he deserved to hold it. "I know what you did," he said. "The trust, the dinner, all of it." I didn't respond. "Why would you do that to us?" Slowly, I reached for my planner, a worn, familiar book marked with decades of schedules, names, and small handwritten notes. I flipped to the current week and turned the page so he could see. Under the heading Family, the space was empty. No names, no initials, just a blank line. Corin stared at it as if the absence itself was speaking to him. Before he found the words, I closed the planner. Then I opened to the next page filled edge to edge. Final interviews for the foundation. Grant distributions confirmed. Opening gala preparations. Apprentices lodging. Arranged future programs scheduled. He searched for himself in those lines. There was no place for him. Only forward. The dining hall wasn't grand. No crystal chandeliers. No imported roses. No photographers angling for sponsored shots. Just warm air filled with the smell of caramelized onions, rosemary chicken, and quiet, honest laughter, the kind that comes from people who don't want anything from you except your presence. The apprentices, 9 of them now, had spent the entire day preparing the meal in secret. They refused to let me help. That had been their only rule. I had taught them technique, balance, restraint, how to plate with intention, how to season with patience, how to respect the ingredients and the hands that worked them. Tonight, they were returning all of it to me. When I stepped inside, I paused. A long table made from reclaimed pine stretched down the room, lined with mismatched chairs, handmade cloth napkins, candles in simple jars. And at the head of the table stood a carved wooden seat, draped with a linen sash embroidered with my name. Above my place setting lay a handwritten card. Tonight's menu: slow braised lamb over lemon farro, with herbed yogurt, a dish built from everything I'd taught them. I laughed, then felt tears gather behind my eyes as I sat down. They served each course with reverence, as if presenting a small piece of the future they were building. When dessert arrived, Ava, one of the older apprentices, a 4-year-old grandmother who once doubted she could start over, lifted her glass first. "For the woman," she said, voice steady, "who fed more than mouths. She fed futures." Around the table, glasses rose. Single fathers restarting their lives. A retired bus driver who mastered Pachu. Women who thought their second acts had expired. None of them had ever asked whom I had once been married to. None had questioned my choices. They only knew I had said yes to them when others never had. I lifted my own glass. "They excluded me from one dinner," I said softly, "so I built 100 more without them." We toasted. No speeches, no cameras. Just the sound of forks tapping gently against pure joy. When the evening drifted to an end and the last candle flickered low, I lingered alone at the head of the long table. The room hummed with the afterglow of a night made not of pretense but of purpose. The quiet was the same kind of quiet I once feared, the kind that used to feel like rejection. But now, it wrapped around me warmly, earned and whole. Because I had finally learned something no folding chair, no withheld invitation, no forgotten seat could ever teach me. The only seat that truly matters is the one you give yourself.